Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Abby and I'm going to be talking about mocking up my knits. I'm going to show you how I did that for some of the projects that I talked about in my fall 2025 knitting plans video. These are going to be pretty quick tutorials. I'm not going to go in depth. I'm just going to show you the steps and the tools that I used to create my mock-ups. And I'm working in free open source software. I'm using GIMP and Inkscape. You might want to be familiar with those tools before following along with this video. You might want to supplement some other tutorials because I don't like explain everything. But again, I just want to quickly show how I did it. I'm not an expert in this. I don't really know what I'm doing. I just know enough to have figured this out. I'm also not a graphic designer, but you know who is a graphic designer? Ali Makes Everything. She has a video talking about how she mocks up her knits, and she also goes into a little bit more detail about why you would want to mock up your knits, like what you can ultimately use these mock-ups for. So I highly recommend checking that video out. It is much longer, much more in-depth than this one. I will link it in the description. For me, the point of these mock-ups is not to get like the most accurate version of something. It's just to get a rough idea of what something is going to look like. So you'll see that my mock-ups are nowhere near perfect. The first mock-up I'm going to make is probably the simplest one, which is just changing the color of the garment. So if you have a solid color yarn and you just want to see what your garment would look like as a single color, here's how to do that. Okay. So to start, I am going to make an outline of the sweater so that we have just the sweater selected. So I'm going to use the paths tool. I'm going to zoom in here and just start making an outline of the sweater. Point by point, just going around and outlining the sweater. And you can click and drag to create curves. It really doesn't need to be exact. And when it comes to things like this, where she's holding this glass, so it's gonna be a little bit harder to get like a clean outline of the sweater, that's fine. I'm just gonna work around it, do my best. It's not going to look perfect, but we don't need it to. And then when I get back to my first point, I'm gonna hold Control to connect it all. And then I will click selection from path, and that's going to create a path. And if we double click it, we can get our points back. So if we needed to make a change to it, we can still. All right, now we're gonna grab the color of our yarn. So I have my yarn open here, and you'll want to use the eyedropper to grab an accurate color. It can be a little tricky to figure out which of, the shaded yarn photo to pick from. I tend to go for one of the lighter spots because I think that generally represents the color better. Okay, before we continue, I'm going to create a copy of my layer just by hitting Control-C, Control-V. And now I'm going to be working from this new layer. And now we're going to colorize it. So I'm going to go up to Colors and click Colorize. And you can see now that our sweater is a different color. Now immediately I can see that my outline doesn't quite capture the halo that's underneath peeking out from the red yarn. And if I were being nitpicky, I might want to go back and fix that at this stage and just expand my outline a little bit, but I'm not going to be that picky about it. So I'm going to click Color and put in our green color. So that's pretty close to my yarn. If you want, you can play around with the different modes under blending options. So by default, it's replace, but depending on what your yarn is like and what you're going for, you might want to try out some different modes. HSV hue and HSL color are some good options. LCH hue and LCH color. They're all gonna do different things. So just play around with it and figure out what looks the closest to what you're going for. I think Replace did a pretty good job, but I want to lighten the color a little bit so that it looks closer to my yarn. I think something about there looks good. Okay, we're almost done, but there is one thing that I want to fix, which is that there are some elements of the sweater that changed color, but they weren't supposed to. So the buttons and then also her thumb was part of our selection. So I am going to erase the coloring just on those spots. And so again, we're working in our top layer. So I'm using the eraser tool and I'm just going to adjust my hardness and simply erase the coloring of the buttons. And then I'll just do the same for her thumb. And here's what that final mock-up looks like. Is it perfect? No, but does it give us a rough idea of what this cardigan would look like in the Sandnes Garn Statement Green yarn? Yes. The next mock-up I'm going to do is one where you're using yarn that isn't a solid color. So in this case, I'm using a tweed yarn, and I want to create a mock-up where the tweed speckles or flecks are represented in the final mock-up. I'm still going to start out with an outline of my sweater. So I'm going to click the Paths tool and start to make my outline. All right, now I'm going to make a path from my selection, and then I'm going to copy and paste so that I'm working from a different layer. Okay, so instead of just picking a color from my yarn, I need to do this a little bit differently. So I'm going to go to Ravelry and look at people's projects that they've made with the yarn that I want to use and try to find a clean stockinette project that I can take a screenshot of so that I can overlay that on my photo. So here's the yarn that I'm using, Rowan Felted Tweed. I'm going to go to Colorways and type in the color that I'm using. And we have 105 projects to choose from, so that's pretty good. So from here, I'm just gonna start looking at projects and see if there is some stockinette that I can capture. This is a great photo because it's high quality. This looks like a perfect piece of stockinette here. So I'm just going to screenshot that, drag and drop my pattern on top of my photo like that. I'm going to start copy pasting on top of my sweater like this and just make sure that I cover the entire sweater. Now that we have covered the sweater, I'm going to go to our shirt layer and select Alpha to Selection, and then go back to our overlay and click Add Layer Mask. Make sure that it is on Selection and then click Add. Now we want to play around with the mode of our pattern layer to try to get something that looks closer to the sweater underneath. So I'm going to try some different things just to see what looks closest to what I'm going for. And I'm going to pull in a photo of my skein of yarn just so that I can get a more accurate representation. Okay, I think HSV Hue is doing the best job here. So I'll take away the yarn. And there you go. That is our sweater in a different yarn. And here is what that finished mock-up looks like. I think it's pretty close to what it would look like if I knit it out of this Rowan Felted Tweed. I will say that if you're trying to mock up variegated yarns or color changing yarns, or just yarn that is going to do something less predictable, it is harder to mock up. I haven't explored mocking up variegated yarns that much, but I know that Ali does talk about that in her video. All right, the final mock-up is for a colorwork sweater, and for this we are using both GIMP and Inkscape. What you first want to do is create an outline of your sweater like we did with the first two, so I've already done that. And then I'm going to open Inkscape. Inkscape is a vector graphics tool. So what I'm going to do in here is create a vector of the image. From here, I'm going to select the image, and then I'm going to go up to Path and Trace Bitmap. We want to do multiple scans, And you can change a lot of these settings, but just to start, I'm gonna select colors. And I find that 8 colors is a decent first try, even if you're not using 8 colors in your color work, because it's going to pick up on all the shadows and the lighter parts. And you want to try to capture as much of the actual color work as you can. I'm also going to select smooth, and I'm going to up the speckles to 12. This is just going to help remove some of the speckling that's going to happen. Again, you can play around with this. There's not like a default setting that works for every photo, so you're just going to have to like try a bunch of things. So I'm going to click update, and we're going to get a preview of what this is going to look like. And already from the preview, that looks pretty good to me. So to process that, I'm going to hit apply, and you can see that it captured quite a bit of the detailing. Like, we're getting most of our colorwork motifs. Not all of them, and it's definitely not perfect. So I just want to show you, if I use the same settings but I don't select smooth, here's what's going to happen. So it's going to create a very speckly version that's just going to be a lot more difficult to use. But what you can try is keep the smooth off, but reduce how many colors you tell it to use. And that is what that gave us. So it's definitely crisper, but you can see that we're still dealing with a lot of, there's just a lot more going on here. There's a lot more detail. And so in the next step, it's going to be harder to place your colors where you want them. But if you're going for something that's crisper, this is probably a better option, just to leave the smooth off. Okay, but now that we've created a vector, we can go into the Edit Paths by Nodes tool. And then when we hover over our vector, it's going to select all of the paths that it identified as a different color. So if I click into one of these, you can change the color. But if I want to actually mock this up with the colors that I have chosen, so I'm going to start with the sweater body first. And I'm going to try to get something to what I would be knitting. Let's see. These settings are a little bit different than what I used when I first mocked it up, and you can see that it just has quite a bit more detail than mine. Let me pull in the one that I did earlier. And so you can just decide which you like better. If you did want to come in and fill in the white, you can use the paint bucket tool and just start clicking and filling all of that in. But this is how close I was able to get it within Inkscape. So it doesn't look great, but from here I took it into GIMP, which is a little bit easier for me to work in. And I just used a paintbrush and the paint bucket tool and went in and cleaned it up. The color work itself is never going to be accurate or exact, but that is just the consequence of doing it this way. The benefit is that you can do things very quickly. So if I wanted to mock up 5 different versions with different colors just to get a sense of how that's going to translate to a colorwork yoke, then I can do that in like 5 to 10 minutes. And here is the final cleaned up version of my mock-up. I think colorwork is probably the hardest to mock up, so it's not going to be the crispest or the most accurate, but do I need to say it again? It's not supposed to be perfect. And I think you get it. So that is how I mock up my knits. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.